Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone to today's hearing on the Internal Revenue Service and 2011 tax return filing season. Today's conversation about the IRS should begin with the topic too often ignored, and that is the taxpayer. The National Taxpayer Advocate's recent report to Congress provided some alarming facts on what the federal tax code has become and how it affects the average taxpayer. Every year, taxpayers face a tax code of growing complexity. For instance, there have been nearly 5,000 changes to the tax code in the past 10 years. Between the period of 1975 and 2005, the code tripled in size. As a result of the growing length and complexity of the tax code, individual taxpayers and businesses spend an estimated 6.1 billion hours and $163 billion every single year complying with the tax filing requirements. The cost of compliance for your average individual taxpayer was over $250 in 2007. So as we meet today, we're in the middle of the 2011 tax return filing season, and millions of individuals and businesses are working to meet their annual tax return filing obligations. As of March 18th, IRS had processed over 73 million individual tax returns and issued nearly 65 million refunds, totaling $193 billion. With 2.5 weeks to go until the April 18th filing deadline, the subcommittee looks forward to hearing more about the ongoing tax return season and any problems the agency and tax return filers might be encountering. The subcommittee would also like to learn more about the efforts the IRS has undertaken to improve the efficient processing of returns and refunds, including its e-filing modernization program. Charged with administering this growing tax code, the IRS must simultaneously respect the rights of taxpayers, provide assistance to the millions of taxpayers who have questions about their taxes, and go after those who cheat the system. And the agency has to do this against a backdrop of ever-increasing responsibilities to administer social policy programs. The IRS's dual mission of both revenue collector and social policy program administrator diverts IRS resources from its core mission and can diminish taxpayer service. Among the biggest contributors to this problem is the new health care law, which gives the IRS a host of new responsibilities, including the indoor tanning tax, new taxes and fees on employers and individuals, and a complex small business tax credit. For 2011 fiscal year, the IRS has requested nearly $6 billion, an increase of more than 8% from the fiscal year 2010 appropriation. Included in this $6 billion is a request for nearly $500 million and over 1,200 new employees to implement the health care law's new provisions. And the cost of health care law do not end there. IRS's implementation of the health care law is estimated to cost somewhere between $5 and $10 billion over the next 10 years. So in addition to the current tax return filing season and the IRS budget request, I hope we can take this opportunity to discuss this dual mission and whether it's hampering the IRS's ability and core revenue collection responsibilities. So with that, I want to welcome Commissioner Shulman today, who is here to testify, and look forward to a fruitful discussion of his agency, its mission, and the ongoing tax return filing season. Commissioner, I know you were working under very time-constrained circumstances with the passage of the law in December. I know you have scrambled to get things done, and it seems to me at this stage things are going fairly well with the filing season, so we look forward to your comments. Before I yield to Ranking Member Lewis, I ask unanimous consent that all members' written statements be included in the record without objection so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the GAO's interim report on the 2011 tax filing season, which is being released today, also be included in the record. So without objection so ordered. Now I want to welcome Commissioner Shulman, and I will yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding this hearing on the Internal Revenue Service. I'm pleased to have the Commissioner before us today. This hearing is timely. I have serious concern about the Republican plans to cut funding for the agency and the effect that those cuts will have on our taxpayers. The majority's plan to cut $600 million from the agency budget this year will result in $4 billion in lost revenue. I do not understand how this helped the deficit. The plan also harms taxpayers. An estimate 3 million people will not have their telephone call answered, and 1 million people will not receive face-to-face service at an agency center. This makes no sense. I look forward to discussing the agency proposed budget for next year. Most of the funds requested for the Affordable Care Act or to assist taxpayers and improve operation, not for enforcement agents as charged by some. Finally, I would like to ensure that the agency has the resources it needs to balance taxpayer services and enforcement. It is important for the agencies to provide services that help elderly, low-income, and working-class Americans fulfill their tax obligations. It is equally important that the tax laws are applied fairly to all taxpayers. I look forward to the Commissioner's testimony on how to achieve this balance. And I welcome you also, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member. And now I want to welcome IRS Commissioner Douglas Shulman. Commissioner Shulman has served in this position since his appointment in 2008. And, sir, we want to thank you for being here today to testify. As is customary, you'll have the 5 minutes for your oral statement to present your testimony, and your full written testimony will be submitted for the record. And I now will yield time to Commissioner Shulman to present your testimony. Thank you, sir.
Chairman Bustani, Ranking Member Lewis, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to testify on the filing season and to provide you with an overview of our proposed 2012 budget. Despite some of the challenges that the chairman mentioned earlier this year, particularly the late passage of tax law, the 2011 filing season has proceeded smoothly. As of March 19th of this year, we've received more than 75 million individual returns, have issued 65 million refunds with an average value of refunds of about $3,000. Our e-file program continues to grow. This year, so far, our e-file rate is 6.3% higher than last year, and last year was 5% higher than the year before. We also continue to see people using their home computers and filing continue to grow. We've received almost 25 million returns from home computers, a 9% increase over last year. The reason this is so significant is it is much cheaper for the federal government to process an electronically filed return. It costs about 17 cents as opposed to $3.66 for a paper return, and people get their refunds much quicker. We've also seen an increase in self-service options. Our web traffic has grown 8%. Our Where's My Refund tool has grown 19%, and automated calls answered have increased by about 21%. Regarding our assisters answering phone calls, pleased to tell you our level of service, despite a flat budget, remains at 74%, and our accuracy remains at 95%, and so the phone operation is going well this year. Let me also note, during this filing season, we continue to try to adjust core programs to meet evolving needs of taxpayers, and a good example of this is what I call our Fresh Start program, which is focused on our collection area. We announced that we were expanding our Offer and Compromise program, making the ability for lien withdrawal easier, making it easier for small businesses to enter an installment plan with us this year, and changing our criteria for filing liens. And you're going to see us continue to evolve our programs as taxpayers' needs warrant it. Let me now turn to the 2012 budget. This budget was crafted during a time of fiscal austerity. For me, that means aggressively pursuing savings where we can find savings, but also investing in strategic priorities that enhance the nation's tax system. I think the President made clear in the budget that the IRS is vital to the functioning of the government, to keeping our nation strong and our economy strong. Last year, we collected $2.3 trillion. This translates to every dollar spent on the IRS, about $200 comes into the federal government. I think it's in recognition of the critical role that we play that this 2012 budget makes judicious investments. It also tries to keep the balance between taxpayer service, serving honest Americans, and our enforcement programs, making sure we find people who aren't paying their fair share of taxes. It also continues our investment in our core account database, which is the cornerstone of our modernization effort. When this is complete in 2012, assuming we get the funding, it's going to mean faster processing of all returns, faster refunds to all Americans, and enhanced data security of our technology systems. Because of our unique revenue-raising functions, our budget more than pays for itself and directly contributes to deficit reduction. And I will also note this year's budget, as well as the last several years that I've been here, has significant savings. We have $190 million of program cuts and savings in the 2012 budget. Now, I'd be remiss in my responsibilities if I didn't make a few comments about H.R. 1. Under the House version of the continuing resolution, the total 2011 funding for the IRS would be $603 million below the 2010 enacted levels, with potentially devastating effects to the nation's tax system. If H.R. 1 were to be enacted, the IRS would have to make substantial and immediate cuts to all of its programs, including its enforcement programs. We estimate that this would reduce enforcement revenue this year by $4 billion. This would increase the deficit by about 7 times the magnitude of the proposed reduction in the budget. In addition, such a conspicuous drop in IRS enforcement activities could have an impact on longer-term voluntary compliance. We would also be forced to dramatically reduce resources to taxpayer services, leading to millions of unanswered phone calls, delayed processing of correspondence, and potentially delayed refunds. In conclusion, we're in a very challenging environment with difficult choices to make. Despite this year's challenges, the filing season is progressing smoothly. So I look forward to a constructive dialogue today and over the coming weeks and months. And Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Lewis, I also just want to very much thank you for the support and constructive dialogue that this committee has had with our agency over the last several years and continuing this year. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you, Commissioner. I mentioned to you before the hearing, I appreciated your written testimony and some of the breakdowns that you gave us, and the information was very, very helpful. As I mentioned in my opening statement, too often we all forget the enormous price in both time and dollars that the individual taxpayer has to pay to comply with the tax filing requirement. And of course, Americans spend a vast amount of time and resources every year to file their tax returns. The tax code clearly is growing in complexity, and this shifts enormous cost to the taxpayer, but also makes honest compliance more difficult. The complexity has added significant burdens to the IRS. Just a simple question. Is it your opinion that the tax code is too complex?
Yes.
We're going to be going through tax reform, and this is certainly going to take time. It's going to be a deliberative process, and so I think as we go through that process, clearly with in mind on how to simplify things for the taxpayer, we also need to keep in mind the burdens that it places on your agency as well. And I'd just like to hear you expound a little more on that aspect of the complexity.
Sure. So my short answer, yes, is what I believe. The tax code is incredibly complex, and unfortunately has been going in the wrong direction over the last decade. As I mentioned in my remarks, the vast majority of my employees' time and resources is spent trying to serve the American people and help them wade through tax complexity, get their refunds quickly. And so we have a pretty unique view into what it feels like to be a taxpayer wrestling with the tax code. And so we, and we'd be happy to engage in whatever dialogue people would like just about simplicity. We also can see where there's either honest mistakes made, and because of the complexity, a lot of noncompliance is honest mistakes by taxpayers just getting tripped up with the code. And we see where we have issues in areas of controversy. And a lot of places where we have controversy is where there's complexity, because there's vagaries in the law. We then need to, with the Treasury Department, promulgate guidance. And so anything you can do to simplify the code certainly helps our agency, because we spend a lot of time answering questions, providing service, correcting mistakes, and then having enforcement actions around the complex areas of the law, as well as, my belief is it would certainly help taxpayers.
And I think you bring an important perspective to this, because I know in our conversations in the past, you've started businesses, you came from the business world, and had to deal with the tax code from the perspective of a business owner. And now you're in your position heading the agency, the Internal Revenue Service. And I think you told me in the past that you get assistance when you file. Is that true?
What I traditionally have, yes.
Yes. And so when the IRS commissioner himself is requiring, professional assistance to deal with the tax code, I think that's a statement in and of itself, as many of us who serve in Congress probably also, I know I get professional help with mine. So again, it's just an indicator of the complexity of the code. The new health care law, of course, it's no news that it's added enormous new duties and responsibilities. I mentioned the indoor tanning tax, new Medicare Part D rebates, new taxes on drug makers, insurance subsidies, employer penalties, and of course the individual mandate. The 2012 budget proposal requests nearly $500 million in new funding, and I think we've seen the figure of 1,200 new employees to implement the law for next year. And much of this is a law, much of this in the law that isn't implemented until later in the decade. So I think CBO estimates that the 10-year cost for the IRS is going to be somewhere in the $5 to $10 billion range. And do you agree with that as a result of the Affordable Care Act? Is that?
Yeah, I think the CBO estimates are
okay.
In the general direction.
Yeah. And for 2012, do you have any indication? I think we've seen mention of tens of millions of dollars for infrastructure related to the Affordable Care Act and I guess related staff. Do you have a sense of what kind of staffing request or build out you will need for the 2012 budget?
Yeah, the 2012 budget submitted is the 1,200 people. I mean, just a few comments about that. I mean, one is I want to make very clear that the IRS's role in the Affordable Care Act is to implement the tax code provisions in the act, the movement of money. It's really HHS's responsibility to be involved in the health policy issues. The vast majority of our request, 82%, is really around technology and infrastructure to build systems to match household incomes, because right now we have AGI by individuals and couples, and build the interfaces with insurance companies and the state exchanges to administer the refundable credit portion of that. That's the vast majority of the request.
Have you, do you have an estimate of how many full-time employees you're going to need to bring in for that for the implementation in 2012?
Well, so 2012 is the 1,200.
That's the 1,200.
Request, yes.
Okay, for clarification. Okay, thank you. I now yield time to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, again, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for your years of service. I noticed that you held a number of open houses this filing season. I would like to know who attended these open houses and what problem are they facing?
Yeah. So about 2 years ago, as we continue to innovate around service, and 2 years ago we were still deep in the nation's worst recession, I really sat down with my senior team and said, what can we do to help taxpayers? How can we go the extra mile to help resolve issues? Last year, we actually held 1,000 open houses around the country, and they were Saturdays, trying to create another service option so working people who had the weekend off could do this. It was mainly targeted at individual taxpayers as well as small businesses who had an outstanding issue with the IRS and wanted to resolve it. A lot of people, if they get behind on their tax, don't understand. They can come in, get on an installment plan. If they really can't pay and their circumstances has changed, we can put them in currently not collectible status and leave them alone for a year. And we can also compromise their debt if there's no prospect of paying. So what we did is we made these available, and we had everyone from revenue agents, customer service reps, appeals officers who could settle, so everyone was there that they could settle their issues. This year, we're repeating it based on lessons of last year. And I think the main issues, and I can get back to you with specific breakdown, but we're trying to target people who have an outstanding debt or are wrapped up with us in some way, either need to get on an installment plan, need to pay, want to get a lien released, or have simple tax law questions. And so we'll service anyone from across the board, but we're really trying to focus on people who got caught up in the economic downturn, circumstances have changed, we can answer questions, and really resolve any situations once and for all.
Have you been a little more, not you, but the agency, I guess, been a little more liberal during these difficult economic times with taxpayers?
So the way I would describe it is we always have the ability to be reasonable with folks and to compromise the debt, et cetera. If you walk around, I encourage anyone on the subcommittee to come visit IRS facilities. If you walk around, despite the popular image of the IRS in people's head, if you walk around and meet any of our employees, they say, I'm serving the American people. Again, a year and a half ago, we did the open houses. I also announced expedited lien release for people who were refinancing houses. As I mentioned this year, we increased from $25,000 of tax debt where a small business could automatically get on an installment plan without any questions asked to $50,000 this year. We basically said we won't file a lien with someone if they create direct deposits with us this year. People who felt that their credit scores were being hurt because a lien wasn't withdrawn after they paid their debt, but rather was released, we made it so they can automatically get it withdrawn. And so absolutely, I think my answer is, in these tough economic times, I've pushed the agency hard, and the agency has responded very well to get creative, to try to make sure we help out taxpayers where we can, while also trying to make sure those who can afford to pay their tax bill.
Mr. Commissioner, are those that claim the earned income tax credit more likely to be audited than the general population?
Yes, they are. With any large refundable tax credit, there's always the temptation for fraud. It's also a very complex credit, as I was discussing with the chairman, and so I think there's a whole set of honest mistakes that happen in claiming that. But we basically have a 2% audit rate of earned income tax credit. We have a 1% audit rate for the rest of the individual taxpayer population, and about 36% of our audits last year were targeted at the earned income tax credit. What we try to do with that program, like any of our programs, is have balance. We do a lot of outreach and education. We've done it with a lot of members of Congress to make sure people who are eligible take advantage of the credit. And then we have very rigorous enforcement programs to make sure people who aren't eligible, we try to stop them from getting the credit.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the ranking member. The chair now recognizes Mr. Gerlach for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. Can I follow up on just some of that last commentary you made on auditing? Does the auditing work that the IRS does that fall under the enforcement part of your budget request? The for this year, $5.9 billion that you're requesting for enforcement, quote unquote, would auditing of individuals and businesses fall under that category?
Yes, it would.
Okay. And did I hear you correctly just a moment ago that on average you audit individuals, about 1% of the individuals that file with the IRS per year?
That's been a traditional rate, spread out across all individuals. It varies by income category. It varies by, as I said, earned income tax credits, a particular interest of ours.
And what percent of business filers do you audit per year?
It depends on the level of income and also, the volume of filers that come in. Some quick statistics. Businesses that have assets below $10 million, last year it was about 0.94%, so just under 1%. Just under 1%. And then it goes up. Businesses that have over $250 million of assets have about a 23% audit coverage rate. And then the largest corporations in the country generally have auditors on site and have lots of ongoing interactions with us.
So are the audits for the business side, are they kicked off based upon random selection or based upon red flags that come up from their prior filings or their periodic filings? What kicks in an audit for particularly a small business owner?
Yeah, our audit criteria is based on a number of factors. We've been, as an agency, and I've been very focused on risk-based audits is the most important to us. So it can be, we have certain geographic coverage. We have certain risk factors and parameters around data that comes in on returns. And we also have certain areas, certain businesses which are more risky from a compliance standpoint. Cash businesses obviously have different compliance issues than
what's
others.
the average length of an audit? How much time does your auditor spend in that business, and how do you juxtapose that against the amount of time, therefore, the business has to participate and cooperate with those auditors in terms of the time they're then taking their employees away from their business duties to then comply with the audit requests that the auditors are making? What's the ratio of time you're spending in the businesses auditing them, and what's the amount of time they're putting in to cooperate and participate and try to satisfy the auditor's requests?
Yeah, no, I can get back to you with the, I don't have the ratio off the top of my head, but
I guess what I'm getting at is, what's the loss of productivity and profitability of these businesses that are taking time to comply with your requests? And have you ever calculated what the impact of the auditing process is on profitability and productivity of the businesses that you're involved in?
We look at burden and calculate burden quite a bit. And let me just share with you my approach and my philosophy about this is, what we try to do is do our job of making sure there's compliance with the law, do a lot of outreach and education. We've got extensive programs around small businesses and making sure we help them comply with the law. And try to do our job in the least burdensome manner possible. Obviously, nobody likes to have an audit, and it's going to take some time when someone does an audit. We've tried to move more and more, as I mentioned, to targeting our audits to places where there's potential noncompliance and leaving taxpayers who have traditionally been compliant alone. We've also tried to get better and better at using data so that data comes in, we analyze the data, and when we go in, we spend less time.
What of those that are audited on the business side, and I'd be interested on the individual side as well, but on the business side, staying with that, how many are found to be in noncompliance or to have violated the code based upon that audit? What percentage of those in the total audited group there, how many do you find have violated the law and need to either pay penalties or interest or combination?
Yeah, we measure something called the no change rate, which is what percentage of people do we go in, do we audit, and there's been no adjustment made. I will get you the numbers, but we try to, one of the measures, are we doing risk-based audits appropriately, if we're auditing and there's not much of a no change rate, then it means we might be picking the wrong folks. If the no change rates have been moving up, which means our analytical group has gotten better at risk-based audits, but we got to be real careful.
Is it 50% of those businesses
Yes,
audited
it's more than 50%.
or in violation in some way, shape, or form? You're saying?
Yeah, have a change in the audit. But just one comment I want to make is that I'm always very cognizant, and there's a whole bunch of things in the law about how we measure our performance. And while we want to go in places that have higher noncompliance in the enforcement arena, I also don't want to set perverse incentives for my people to make changes where they won't happen. And so we're always trying to get that balance right and have that dialogue.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Becerra, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Commissioner, great to see you again. Thank you for the work you're doing. By the way, thank you for the work that you have done in trying to get agents who try to put out their services as preparers of tax returns for the American public, having them become registered agents so that we have a way to track their record of service, because too often I know I have had people come to my office saying, I got swindled by a guy who said he's going to prepare my taxes, did a terrible job, now I'm being audited, I had to pay him a big amount of money, causing big headaches. So thank you very much for helping us go down the road of making the realm of tax preparers a professional service. And I know my own tax preparer has said to me, great work that the IRS did in trying to help the rest of the guys out there do what many of us have done for years, and that is provide a professional service that we're willing to have audited at any time. So thank you for that. I know you're saving the American public a great deal of money and probably increasing their tax refunds because they're calculating them correctly. You mentioned something very troubling. The budget bill that was passed by this House, H.R. 1, by the Republican majority a few weeks back, would cut $600 million out of your budget, which you said would cost us in revenues because of lower tax collections, proper and legitimate tax collections, some $4 billion. So by almost a factor of 7, we would be increasing the size of the deficit by instituting a cut that would not allow you to go out and do your collection services appropriately. And it might also undermine the voluntary system that we have for tax payment by American taxpayers. Does that mean that you would actually have to reduce the number of personnel that are actually working to help process forms? What actually goes into this $600 million cut that makes it difficult for the U.S. Treasury to collect the money it's owed to it, and therefore makes other taxpayers have to pay more because they'll have to make up for the $4 billion lost by those who owe the money?
So as I mentioned, first of all, I'm hopeful, at least from my proprietary perspective as the IRS commissioner, that we don't have those cuts. And I know that all members of Congress and the administration are now working to try to get a budget deal done. The cuts would be, those are just big cuts that would have to be jammed into a 6-month window. And so we'd have to have across-the-board cuts. We'd either have to have long furloughs or RIFs, and we'd be taking people basically away from every function. So we'd be taking people away from collection, we'd take them away from exam, we'd be taking them from automatic screening, we'd be taking them from customer service, we'd be taking them from outreach, we'd be taking them out of our technology operation, and my responsibility is obviously Congress's responsibility to give us whatever budget. My responsibility is to tell you what would happen. This would be, our estimate, $4 billion less revenue, phone calls not answered, returns backed up and not processed.
And so there was no direction in the budget bill that cuts the $600 million as to how you could do it in a way that would not undermine services. And I don't hear you saying that you could find a way to institute those cuts that wouldn't undermine services.
Well, if you look at the allocations, across our enforcement, our service, our operations, budget, all the things I laid out would happen. The biggest cuts to enforcement, because that's where there's been that's where the numbers hit.
I also want to make sure I emphasize again something else you said, because there's a need to dispel this this rumor, this myth floating out there that the money that IRS needs to try to implement this new Patient's Bill of Rights is somehow all focused on getting IRS agents to bang on people's doors, when my understanding is the bulk of the money, the vast majority of the money, is really used to provide assistance, taxpayer assistance services, or to beef up mostly our IT, our intellectual, our internet technology, so that we can help process a lot of these claims. I was looking at the budget that you outlined for the use of the money. Am I correct that 60% of the $470 million that you requested to implement the new Patient's Bill of Rights would go towards computer system upgrades and those things that you need to just implement getting 30 million Americans now with good health insurance, and that of the 40% that remains that would be used for personnel, 2/3 of that would be used for taxpayer services and other ways to provide a service, not necessarily to go out there and do enforcement. So I guess that totals to about 85% of the money being used for services and for better systems operations.
Let me make sure I give you accurate numbers. So let me give you the way I look at it, which is about 82%, or $390 million of the request is to support the refundable credit operation. I mean, clearly the biggest lift for us is the infrastructure around having technology that gets income data smoothly into and out of, in real time, the 50 exchanges that will be built around the country in the 50 different states. When people get a refundable credit, we actually send money on a monthly basis to the insurance company. The people send that money. So we need to have reconciliation systems with them, feeding it back into the states in a real-time basis. Only about 11% or $50 million of the budget is for enforcement. And so everybody likes to talk about IRS agents. We have lots of people who are phone operators, technology folks. We're much more boring than the popular image of the agent. In lots of our operations, I mean, I think of us as a large financial service operation. We're very akin to that. We do a lot of money flows, $2.3 trillion. And so that's where most of it goes. The enforcement money in the 2012 budget is largely for traditional tax enforcement compliance programs around the taxes that are going into effect, that are in effect now and are going into effect over the next year or two.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Ms. Jenkins for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. As the House and Senate continue budget talks in an effort to prevent a government shutdown, it's important that we understand whether the IRS is prepared to handle a government shutdown. So I'm just curious, in the event of a shutdown, what is the IRS's plan to process tax returns and issue tax refunds?
Yeah, well, first of all, tell you everybody's hopeful that there won't be a shutdown. We run a $13 billion financial services operation, and the idea of stopping it for a few days or a few weeks is strange to someone like me who's run big operations. I think the president has been very clear that it's not in anybody's interest to have a government shutdown, and my understanding is there's very productive talks going on at this point. What I will tell you is we had an old plan that looked at government shutdowns based on October 1, when the fiscal year begins. We've never had a government shutdown in the middle of the filing season before. The closer we get to April 15th, the more consideration and factors are at play. And so, as these dates, I think we're on our 6th CR, have pushed out, we've had to adjust plans going forward. I will tell you right now we're in discussions with OMB and the administration of exactly what would happen. And so I can't tell you, our old plan was we deposited checks, we didn't process returns. That was a plan that was built in '95 when there wasn't so much electronic filing, and now we're closely looking at it and are having discussions.
Okay, thank you. In your testimony here, you mentioned that the average refund is nearly $3,000, and you say this money can help taxpayers pay their bills, make needed purchases, and to save. But we all know that this refund money isn't just plucked off the money tree in the back of the Capitol. This is money, this is the taxpayers' money, and it could have been used the whole year for them to invest or to make purchases. And I think instead they're giving the government basically an interest-free loan. So I'm just, again, curious, do you see this high level of refund as a deliberate action of taxpayers, or as a result of maybe a tax code that is overly complex?
You know, my understanding is, and I think each taxpayer is different, I think a lot of taxpayers actually use the withholding system to have automated savings so that they can then get a refund. People like to do it. In my ideal world as a taxpayer, I actually withhold the exact right amount, and I neither pay nor get a refund. That's my own personal goal. It's very hard to hit because of the complexity of the code and estimating exactly all the factors that will come in. And so it is a fact that we usually put out 250 to 300 billion dollars of refunds. Retail sales, the Commerce Department over time has looked at this. Retail sales usually increase in February through May as a direct result of refunds. And I think, I always encourage people to withhold correctly. And so we see it as just, this is a fact of the tax system, neither good nor bad, just a fact that we give you and you make your own judgments about.
But if it was a more simplified calculation, do you think people would deliberately be lending the government interest-free money during the year?
I won't speculate on it. I mean, I think a lot of it is it's not, there's the complexity of the code, but there's also the issue of people don't know always exactly what they'll make, what their spouse will make, what interest income they might get, how their jobs will change, if they're going to get a second job. So I think there's a bunch of factors.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Buchanan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the commissioner being here. You met with us a couple of weeks ago, so I don't know how you get much work done. You're here, but we're excited to see you back. Let me just touch on a couple of things, and it's along the line of tax simplification. I look at, in our area, I was chairman of a chamber. We had about 2,500 businesses. Most of them are, a lot of these businesses are 3 to 10 employees. There's some that are larger companies, banks, and some other things. But I'd say out of the 2,600, probably 2,200 are 20 employees or less. What are you doing to help simplify their ability to file and quarterly things that they've got to file? Because I do hear it just takes so much time and effort from these small businesses. A lot of them don't have a controller or a CPA, or their CPA, if they got an accountants outside. What is the IRS doing to make it simpler for them?
Yeah, we, well, as you know, we implement the tax laws that are written. And, I had the conversation with the chairman earlier about, simpler laws would clearly be helpful, but it's not our role. What we try to do is, given the laws that are on the books, do as much outreach, education, service as we can. And so small businesses, clearly I'd be surprised if our, one of our people wasn't at the Chamber of Commerce on a regular basis in your district, holding education events, explaining tax law changes, being available to businesses. We spend a lot of time with the practitioner community. For individuals, 66% of people use a tax professional. For businesses, including small businesses, it's 80%. So if we can get good information and tools to the practitioner community, they can make sure that people file it well. And we answer millions of calls from small businesses every year. And so, our phone operators spend a lot of time doing that. We have a dedicated website, and we have a dedicated outreach and education unit for small businesses. We have an e-newsletter on tax issues for small businesses that has a distribution of about 200,000. And so we do everything we can, given our resources, given the code.
Secondly, because we just got 5 minutes, what about independent contractors? We have a lot of realtors, everybody else, where maybe it's themselves and their husband, but basically there's a lot of people out there, they might be with Amway or whatever they're with, as independent contractors. Is there anything we're doing to, and their situation's probably even more difficult because they're just themselves, and is there anything we're doing to help them and simplify things for them as well?
Again, we have all of the avenues of service. They usually afford themselves of the individual services. We answered 35 million calls last year. We keep having more self-service options on our website, and we'll continue to do that. And we're trying just to get the balance of, take the service resources we have. My personal view is the vast majority of our service resources should be going to individuals and small businesses who can't afford themselves of, the professional tax community help and are struggling to make ends meet.
And Commissioner, my colleague mentioned it about dispute, where you have a dispute with the IRS, let's say medium-sized companies or a little larger companies. What is the process? Are the negotiators on the IRS side, are they empowered? Because you hear these things a lot of times just drag on and on and on. Very expensive, and not only in terms of outside professionals, but very expensive in terms of the internal time it takes in an organization. I'm not talking about the person that's got 5 employees, someone that's got, in our area, for example, 400 or 500, they have a dispute. It just seems like it drags on forever. And I guess the question is, what is the process on your side to resolve these things, or have someone in that's bright enough, sharp enough, not that they're all not, but are they empowered to get something done and get these things wrapped up and get a compromise, or what's your attitude, or how does it work on your side?
Yeah, no, look, I've been very public. I mean, if you look at things I've been talking about for the last 3 years, my real goal with the business taxpayer is to resolve issues and get certainty sooner for the IRS and for taxpayers. We have a whole slew of programs, and I've been pushing them very hard. Part of it is getting clearer guidance, creating safe harbors so there's not where we can simplify the rules. Part of it is we have an appeals function. So if you disagree with us, we close out an audit, you can go to our appeals function.
But before the appeals, is the auditor itself, the person, do they have a boss that they can go through and try to negotiate it out before it goes to the appeals?
Oh, absolutely. But what I was going to tell you is we've expanded what we call fast-track appeals, where we can just go in an audit, invite an appeals officer in to negotiate a settlement. Our folks have the ability to work through issues, and we have timelines about, you got to get in, you got to get out with folks. Now, some taxpayers complain about the timelines because they say someone's in, they're just trying to get issues and get out.
The big thing I hear is just getting it done fast-track. I'm glad to hear you've got something like that, because they just don't want things to drag on for a year. They'd rather just get the people in the room and try to work something out and move forward, because it costs a lot of money, time, and aggravation over a period of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes Dr. McDermott for questioning.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have been listening to this testimony today, and I'm not real sure why we're having this hearing, but I heard the chairman mention the Affordable Care Act and the additional responsibilities you'll have in auditing people's behavior with respect to purchase of health insurance. And I understand that this afternoon, later today, we're going to mark up a bill that would require or would prevent any money from being spent in an insurance policy from being spent on abortions. And I suspect that the audit responsibility will fall to you to determine whether or not any money has been spent on abortions or is planned by the insurance companies. It sounds like an insurance function that's going to wind up in your hands, and I would be surprised if you've already started to think about this, because you don't start and think until we do something, but it's coming down the road, and I have some questions I would like you to think about and give me a response if you can in terms of how many additional people you're going to have to hire to look at all the insurance plans to be sure that no money's being spent on abortions. One of the issues that I think ought to be considered in that is also the HSA. If I put my money in an HSA, can I take it out and spend it any way I want on health care costs? And how do you audit that to be sure that I'm not taking advantage of the tax code to put money in there and then wind up paying for an abortion for whomever? It seems to me we're adding things. We continually look at the IRS as kind of our unofficial enforcer, and that you wind up with the responsibility for doing that. And I would appreciate if you could give me an answer in writing as to what you think the effect will be. If the bill passes today, preventing the use of any health care money for abortion, I would like to see from you a estimate of what it means to the bureaucracy to have to go around and look and be sure that nobody's taking advantage of the tax code. Do you have any information about that at all at the moment? I mean, how many people you're going to have in this system to do this?
I don't.
And do you have an estimate of what you're spending already, or you will spend to audit the system under the Affordable Care Act?
So on the bill you referred to regarding our involvement in that, I mean, lots of bills are around until bills are passed.
Right.
We'll look at that, and any question you send me, I'd be happy to respond to. Regarding the Affordable Care Act, we laid out in excruciating detail in our 2012 budget what we'll need in 2012, and as I mentioned before, the vast majority of that money is technology, infrastructure, service money to interface with the exchanges, interface with insurance companies to move the money with the refundable credits.
And how are you going to enforce the fact that people have or have not complied with the law, the individual mandate?
Oh, the individual responsibility payment. That is, we requested some money for that in 2012. All of that money is technology and infrastructure money just around systems. It will basically be document matching, just like a W-2. So the insurance company will either send us they'll send us fact of coverage, saying this person's covered or not. If they say they're not, generally people will voluntarily comply. Our systems will match that, and they'll say, I wasn't covered, and here's the payment. If they don't say that and we see it, we'll send them a bill. And the Affordable Care Act was very clear about having some of our enforcement tools, such as a lien or a levy, not being available for that. So think of it like a credit card bill, that you either choose to pay or not pay. If you don't pay, you'll get a bill.
But you have no enforcement capacity.
Well, I mean, that is, some would call that enforcement capacity, getting a letter from the IRS. It's like a credit card bill, but it'll have our letterhead on it. But I think this notion, I think what you're talking about before in here is nobody, first of all, we're just going to have fact of coverage information. We're not going to know about your coverage. We're not going to know about your personal health issues. And second of all, this is not the kind of thing that agents spend time on, these dollar amounts. And so you don't have agents rooting around asking these things. You have document matching and bills that get sent out.
So people could get around the bill.
What's that?
People could get around the bill since no agent's going to ever look into their health care records. You're not going to put agents at work looking into people's health care records.
Most of our enforcement activity is not based on face-to-face agents, and most people comply voluntarily with the tax laws. Lots of people, when they get in correspondence with us, pay up and feel that's enforcement. So I would not characterize it as that we anticipate large numbers of people getting around it, but there's always noncompliance, and there's some noncompliance we don't find.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes Ms. Black for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I talked to you the other day, Commissioner, you asked me if I had some concerns, and I talked a little bit about people making phone calls and maybe getting different answers as they called in one time to the other. But I want to turn to a piece that I have read in the information that was provided to us about telephone assistance for taxpayers, and that it continues to be a problem. The percentage of callers that successfully obtain the live assistance over the phone is down from 74.2% down to 72.6% this year, and the average wait times have also increased from 9.9 to 10.3 minutes. And so far this year, 10.3% of the calls were abandoned, and 0.8% reached a busy signal or ended in a disconnection, probably out of frustration. But both numbers are increases from prior years, and the IRS's goal, as we understand it, is to answer only 71% of the calls in this current year, and then 80% in 2012, which is down from the goal that was set back in 2007 of answering 82%. So the goal has been decreased. And I know that you've requested an additional $30 million. So my question is what do you intend on doing with those $30 million? And with the goal being decreased, just how does that fit? Why a decreased goal?
Sure. No, thanks for the question. We clearly, answering the nation's taxpayers' telephone calls is a big deal to us, and something we take seriously. Let me be very clear about what the level of service is. The level of service, which is actually, I checked this morning, running at about 74% this year, is a formula that takes into account people who hang up, time that comes in. It's the people that get through to a live assister. It doesn't translate into 26% of people unhappy. If you look at, we added last year actually a call waiting feature. So it used to be you just waited. Now it says your wait will be 10 minutes, if it's going to be 10 minutes. If people who hang up after they hear that because they don't want to wait and decide to call back later, if you add that, it adds about 10 percentage points. So you're actually up to closer to 84%. The reality is, from where I sit and my folks who are stretching and trying to hit 74%, it's a pretty straightforward formula. How many people do you have sitting on the phones, answering the phones, being accurate with your questions? And so most of this will be extra seasonal people during filing season. And I'm actually pretty proud the agency is maintaining the level of last year, given that we're under a CR and don't know what kind of cuts are coming forward. And so we're trying to balance the money we have against the level of service.
And my time is running out here, so I do have a second part of the question.
Sure.
But to that, I would say that I hope maybe we use some technology as well, maybe, as you say, to give them more information about will be a 10-minute wait time or whatever, not just personnel, but also looking at other technology that can be used. But I want to turn the attention to a program called the Historic Preservation Facade Easement Program. And I know that Chairman Joanne Emerson was concerned about this and brought this situation up in appropriations, and it's come to my attention by someone else back at home in particular. And then also the IRS Advisory Council in the 2009 general report took issue with what is going on with the audits. And I wondered if you might, in my 1 minute time that I have left, speak a little bit about the program and the fact that even the advisory committee recommends that there may be a safe harbor on the audit policy because of it appearing to be so onerous. And if you could speak to that, I appreciate it.
Sure. Just an aside, would love you to come to our call centers and see. We've spent a lot of time on technology and productivity, and part of the reason we can still hit 74% is because we've squeezed a lot of productivity out of not adding workers this year. On easements, this is historic easements is an issue. You get a big tax credit. We need to have some coverage, make sure people don't abuse it, but also make sure that there's historic preservation and people use use those easements. We take very seriously the ERSAC recommendations. Those people spend a lot of time, and we're looking right now at those recommendations, and I can't speak specifically to the program here, but would be happy to follow up with you on it.
Well, I appreciate that, because there was a recommendation, and I would like to know what you think about the recommendation, if you all will follow through on that. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Kine for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Mr. Commissioner, thank you for being here and for the service that you provide. I missed your opening testimony, so I apologize for asking, but do you have an update in regards to the paid preparer regs that you're coming forward with?
Yeah, we have started registering. We have over 700,000 paid preparers registered this year, which just means they get their name in and they have a number. We're now in the process of working through the testing and continuing education component, which will be the next. I've been very clear that I think this is important for the tax system to have a minimum level of competence with paid preparers. But we also want to do it in a staged way so there's no disruption of service to taxpayers. And so, right now, we registered this year. We're working on the programs for testing, and then we're going to give people several years to pass the test to get in. So it's going to take several years to get up and running.
Okay, and what's the response rate as far as e-filing right now? What percentage are filing?
We last year were about 70%. We're running about 5% higher than that this year. And so it looks to be going in a positive direction.
Okay. And any update on the debit card refund program, how well that's working?
Yeah, no updates at this point at the program that the Treasury Department's run.
Okay. Let me ask you, obviously we've got under the Affordable Care Act, the tax credits going to small businesses, 35% last year. This year will continue to 2014 when it goes up to 50%. Are you encountering any difficulty with small businesses applying for those tax credits under the Affordable Care Act?
You know, most business returns come in the fall, so we'll see what's coming. It's a very targeted group that's eligible, as you know, 10 employees going to 25 employees with a phase out. And so I think you would encounter. I'm not sure people who are eligible are having issues. We've heard people who wish they were eligible who fall outside those ranges.
Yeah, but you're not encountering any degree of difficulty as far as people determining their eligibility or being able to figure out whether to apply for the tax credit or not.
We've tried to do outreach, make sure we're available, and we know the practitioner community is very, very focused on that as well.
Yeah, I checked the website, IRS website, as far as how you're explaining this to the small business community out there, and you also offer some small examples of small businesses, but not a calculator itself. Is that purposeful, that you're avoiding kind of a plug-in calculator from the IRS website to see if the small businesses would be eligible or not?
I don't think we were avoiding it. I mean, calculators are good for some things and not for others, and our folks who work on it probably decided it wasn't going to be that helpful for this.
Okay. Notification of small businesses. IRS sent out postcards to
Yes.
small business about possible notification. What about e-notices to small businesses?
Yeah, so we have a business newsletter for small businesses, and there's been information about it there. I mean,
Are most small businesses filing electronically these days?
Most are.
Okay, so I'm just thinking of the efficiency and maybe cost savings way. Does it make more sense just to notify them through e-notices as opposed to formal postcards being mailed out?
We tried different methods of communication. We always do that. Most of our methods are electronic, but sometimes we send out postcards to folks, sometimes we don't. It's all based on the population, how we can reach them, what information we have in the database. Most of our e-business newsletter, not every small business signs up with the IRS, but we actually had a database of potential eligible taxpayers that had addresses, so that's why we sent them.
Now, I share Representative Becerra's concern that many people have already raised in regards to what the $600 million in cuts the IRS would mean as far as the collection of revenue and the lost revenue that we'd miss out on. But could you today give the committee kind of an update on what type of cost savings measures that you're going through in the IRS to in light of the budget deficits that we're facing, some of the efficiencies that you're trying to encourage?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer, and folks know this even before everybody was talking about the deficit. The day I showed up, I told our team that I view our job of any big business or big operation is stop programs that no longer make sense, make cuts where you can make cuts, and then invest in the future. And that's the set of budgets that I put forward, try to do that. Our 2011 budget, not the 2012, had about 180 million of cuts. Part of that is, as electronic filing has happened, we've actually reduced service centers and people processing returns. We've taken our technology up to a standardization level that we're extracting $75 million each year out of our core technology budget. We've standardized on certain technology platforms, made it easier. We've consolidated data centers. And then we've actually just made some cuts in programs. So we've cut some outreach programs. We've actually cut some mailing of materials, and we're going to keep doing that going forward. I will tell you, given the current fiscal environment, I've also put a hiring freeze in place, exception only, that has to come to me to approve, and we're still investing in strategic priorities. We've dramatically cut our travel budget, except for case-related travel this year, and we've been in the process of putting in contingency plans so that if there are dramatic cuts, that we would do it. I think our employees actually understand, and the way I've explained it to them, and I go out in town halls around the country, is we need to find cuts now, because if we're going to have to make hard decisions. If our budget's cut severely, I would rather have us find the cuts rather than riff people, because in the federal government, when you riff, everyone thinks you're just finding efficiencies. It's a pretty blunt tool, and it's based on a set of seniority and who got added last and people kicked down. And what I'd rather do is, find programs that, at least in the hierarchy of priorities, we feel we should make cuts.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Thank you, Commissioner Shulman, for appearing before the subcommittee, and we appreciate your testimony and your frank answers to all these questions. Please be advised that members may have some additional questions that they will submit in writing, and those questions and answers would be part of this hearing record. Also, Commissioner, no doubt you've heard the news reports about the report that Chairman Herger, Congressman Reichert, and I released yesterday regarding the AARP's structure and function. And early next week, we'll be sending that report to you to request further examination of the tax-exempt status of the AARP. But I wanted to officially let you know that we will be sending that report to you.
Mr. Chairman, in regards to that, could I ask, is the committee going to inquire of other these not-for-profit 501c3 or C4s? Because as we have served on this subcommittee in the past, that's been one issue I've raised quite often with regard to the nonprofit charitable world is, are they in fact providing a service, a public good that pays for the loss of revenue that we give to those nonprofits through the tax-deductible contribution, through the non-tax status that they carry. And so I'd be interested to know, does the chairman expect that this subcommittee will do further examination of other organizations, not just senior organizations, but I know there are a number of new senior organizations that have been out there doing quite a bit of political work, and I'd be interested in making sure that we examine the nonprofit world altogether, but certainly if we're going to look at, in this case, the AARP, other senior groups as well.
I share the gentleman's concerns. I think they're very legitimate, and as we look at tax reform in that context, we'll be having those discussions. And the specific report referenced is a result of questions that were asked by Congressman Reichert and Ginny Brown Waite, and the report released was a culmination of 18 months of work done to seek answers to those questions. So at this time, we're focused on that particular issue, but I think in the context of tax reform, your question is certainly an important one and will be discussed.
I thank the chairman for that response. If I could just indulge and ask one last question. The issue, as I see it, is not about a particular organization or about the activities of an organization. To me, we have a code that says that you can apply to be treated differently from a for-profit entity which has to pay taxes. And if you're going to get to forego having to pay those taxes that an otherwise established enterprise has to pay, we should make sure that the public is getting some benefit for it, because there are a lot of businesses that want to do the same type of thing and get the same type of break. They get, essentially, these not-for-profits get to operate for a far less cost because they don't have to pay taxes. And there are a lot of folks who are out there engaging in an enterprise and paying taxes because they've registered as a corporation or some type of business. And I think it's important for us to make sure that if you're going to try to tell the public that they should not have to pay the same level of taxes that a for-profit enterprise pays, that it should be for a good reason. And I think the commissioner would be a great witness to have, along with the folks from his operations, to try to help guide us in making sure that these operations that otherwise would be taxable as for-profit entities are operating as they should, as organizations that legitimately deserve that nonprofit status.
Very important questions, and certainly we feel that we know we have a current body of law that needs to be followed with regard to whether an organization qualifies as tax exempt or not. And clearly the IRS is the agency, the entity that is best positioned to make that determination to enforce the law. And so that's why we're returning this. We're going to send this specific report over, and then we'll have further discussions in the context of tax reform. I thank the gentleman. His concerns are legitimate. With that, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you, Commissioner.